Welcome to the Career Refresh Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Griffin. I'm a former media and marketing executive turned career strategist and executive coach. I spent my career working my way up and through the ranks of global organizations and startups, and today I show others how to do the same. Join me each week as we discuss the strategies and actionable steps to leverage your strengths, increase your confidence, and develop your career well-being. Ready? Let's do it. Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Jill, your host. All right, this week I'm introducing you to more friends of mine, people that I admire, people that inspire me, and this week it is Kelli Thompson. Kelli holds an MBA. She served as an adjunct management professor, and she has more than 10 years of senior leadership in financial services and technology organizations. Her work has been featured in Forbes, MarketWatch, HuffPost, Working Mother, and Parents Magazine. And she is the author of Closing the Confidence Gap, Boost Your Peace, Your Potential, and Your Paycheck. You're going to love this conversation. She talks about the things and the most important lessons she has learned along the way. We also talk about how her first career, the first thing she thought she wanted to do, and when she realized it wasn't aligned with her values, the pivot that she made. And then we also joke about how she never wanted to write a leadership book, but she did anyway because she was noticing that there needed to be systemic change in organizations. I'm going to put all of Kelli's information in the show notes. You can get the book wherever books are sold and dig in, give it a listen. You want to grab your notes app with this or grab a pen and paper because Kelli is dropping gems and you want to take note of these. All right, my friends, I appreciate you being here so much and give a listen. I'll see you on the other side.
Hey, Kelli, I'm so glad that you're here with me.
Oh, I know. Me too. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Okay. So we've already told everyone about your book that's coming out, and we want to get into a bit of that more, but I want to start at the beginning. I want to know, take us back to some of those early years. What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So let's go way back. So when I was a little girl, I went to Catholic school, I followed all the rules and everything, wore, my navy blue and green plaid jumper and, thought the world definitely worked a certain way, which that wasn't true. We'll get to that. But when I was little, I wanted to be a meteorologist. I was such a weather geek. I loved storms. I loved clouds. I loved laying outside and watching the clouds. And funny story was I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Nebraska. So it's Tornado Alley. So the last day of school, I think I was 8 or 9 years old. And there was supposed to be severe weather that day. So I was ready, this was a good day for me. And sure enough, the storms start to roll in, and it was always going to be my goal that I could see a tornado. But we lived at the edge of town. And so, there was a cornfield across the street from our house. And I saw this funnel cloud form, and I'm outside and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden it starts to circle and circle and it drops into the cornfield. And I'm just out there my mom comes out and she's like, Kelli, she's like, get your butt inside. And I never, ever wanted to be anything else. I read the newspaper so I could see the weather that day all across the world. I watched the news at 6:10 every night because that's when the weatherman came on. And I got to college and I was a meteorology major and I was taking calculus and physics. And those classes were kind of duh. But that wasn't it. It was, and I didn't have adult language for this at the time, but It was my first clue that maybe my career choice wasn't in alignment with my values. And here's why. Because I was in meteorology class and I'm starting to think about, okay, so I'm going to be a TV meteorologist, and as you progress in your career, the main meteorologists work the 6 and 10 o'clock news. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's do I want to work the 6 and 10 o'clock news? When am I going to eat dinner with my family? Well, what if I have kids? When will I go to their games? And I was too young at 19 to put any sort of cognition at the time, but I think that was my first aha that like choosing your career should have some sort of alignment with your values and how you want to live. And a value for mine now is family. So it's not shocking to me that at age 19, this was against, my family value. So fast forward, majored in political science, went back to school and got my MBA. I was in banking for 14 years, and then I worked in technology. So I was used to working in male dominated environments. I was a leader. I led training teams, HR teams. I went from studying weather patterns to human behavior patterns, which,
it's still
they may not be all that different. It is all about climate. I'm like, it might not be that different. And I was in corporate America forever. And then, I was working for a leadership development firm, and I was traveling a ton. So tired of traveling, but I loved all the coaching I was doing. And so my boss was like amazing, super supportive. And she said, you know what, have you ever thought about going off on your own? She's like, we share this coaching client. She goes, I don't have interest in coaching them one-to-one. She's like, why don't you take them? You can have it on a contract basis while you kind of get things under your feet. And the rest is history. I went off on my own in 2019, made it through the pandemic. And, now I exclusively focus on coaching women and helping women advance to the rooms where decisions are made. And so here we are today.
Wow. So do you still, I want to go back to the weather for a second. Do you still have a love in watching the weather? Has that stayed as something that you continue to do?
Yes. So you're going to laugh, but I'm sitting here in my office and my desk faces a window and I face west. And right now there are dark clouds rolling in. Ooh. So, yes. So my daughter is a senior, and so she'll be graduating, and she's our only. And so next year, like, we're making plans. And I've always told my husband, I'm like, we need to go on one of those storm chaser journeys. Like, I could totally be the type of person that I could just see myself in retirement in my chair with my dog and like my weather radio. And I've got I'm like a storm spotter. I could probably totally do that. So yes, the answer is yes. It still fascinates me. I still love, I know like cloud names and stuff. And so, yeah, I'm still a geek.
I love it. Wow. And I love that idea of also working for someone that was supportive enough to see that you doing something different, even if it meant leaving the company. That is really rare. So much needed, but very rare. So I love that you had that experience. In the process of then going through your career and then eventually out on your own, what has been the most unexpected strength that you've discovered about yourself?
Consistency. I have this quote in my book, and I don't have it sitting next to me, but I have little quote cards and bookmarks made for my book that says, consistency isn't sexy, but it works. And I think one of the things that I've learned about myself is that, let's just talk about Gallup strengths for a second. I'm not an achiever. My top 5 Gallup strengths are relator, learner, input, futuristic, and maximizer. So
which is why we're friends, because we have many of the same top strengths.
I love it. And so, I'm not the person that is going to work an insane amount of hours. I am not the person that is going to be always the flashiest and be like, look at this, look how much I accomplished and all these things. But one of the things I've noticed over the course of me and my career, and especially in entrepreneurship, is literally just showing up every day consistently with the same message. It's like consistency and clarity, like being super clear on who I serve and what I do, and just day in, day out, super unsexy consistency. And I think of it a lot like running a marathon. You have to have some endurance for the journey.
That's that. What do you think has been the hard lesson that you've continued to learn throughout your career? And maybe you're still in that cycle, or maybe we've moved past the cycle, but what was that lesson, that hard lesson that you continued to learn?
Lesson or lessons?
Whatever you got. I know they want to hear it.
I'm sitting here. Okay. So there's been some hard lessons. Hard lesson number 1, let's relate it back to strengths, because I know how much, we love Gallup and strengths. Right. One of my strengths is input, and that's amazing. And that's also a problem, because I'm an introvert and I love learning. I can input, learn all day. And if I'm not conscious about it, I will realize, oh my gosh, I've been inputting and learning all day long. What have I output? And that has been a constant lesson for me, is that I have to look up, take a deep breath. And instead of like just sitting in the world, gathering all this information, I have to remember that like progress is made when we get out into the world. So that's lesson number one. And even as a leader, I would often get feedback like, hey, I know you're working on a lot of things. You got a lot of stuff brewing in here. You got to tell people, like you got to like put it out into the world. And I think for leaders, it's really important. And I really had to learn to communicate in a way that was really outside of my comfort zone. So that's a big thing. And then I think the other lesson that I'm continuing to learn is that like, simplify, simplify, simplify. I think as a coach, and especially because I led training and development teams and I oversaw human resources, when I was pulling together employee programs or leadership development programs, my temptation is always to stuff as much content in there as I possibly can. Like, let me tell you everything you know. And I'm even trying to be mindful not to do it in the podcasts like this. Like people can only handle so much information. So like break it down, keep it simple, be really 101 on things. And so those are just, I feel like the lessons that the universe always puts back in front of me all the time.
Yeah. I love both of them for different reasons. So one of my friends, Andrea Nakayama, she talks about the education gap. One, because sometimes we actually do need to get education. And then other times we use it to hold us back. And I recently was talking about the but first, like I'm going to do that, but first I have to get this certification, or first I have to learn this additional thing. I have to have this experience before I go for the promotion. And it's that education gap that we use. Sometimes it's helpful. And then all of a sudden, sometimes it becomes, as you said, an input. I'm an input too. There's an overabundance of information, and it's really then hard to sort through the clutter, which leads into the simplicity of exactly that, where the human brain, especially in a format like this and in other formats, 2 to 3 things is really the big takeaway. More than that, it's like reading a scientific method book, which I realize some people are going to enjoy. Perhaps you, myself, my weather friend, but for the rest of us, simplify. Those are great pieces. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's so funny. You talk about the but first. I have an entire chapter on the but first. And I talk about how it was the condition that my daughter had, and how as leaders, we use that as a crutch so much. Oh, but first. So just validating 100%. Yeah. And it's always a belief, like, I don't know enough. And probably some of that is imposter syndrome, but amen to all of that.
Yeah. So because you and I have talked about this before, I want you to tell people, because it always makes me chuckle when you said that you were never going to write a leadership book. And then here you are writing a leadership book. So take them through why that was your first belief and why you end up writing a book on leadership.
Yeah. So I wanted to write a book since I was a little girl. Like, if you haven't figured out yet, I was kind of a nerd. I love books. I love to study weather patterns. I was thinking about this last night. I was like, I remember I must have been in 4th or 5th grade. And one of the requirements was that we had to buy a dictionary, a paper dictionary, because, we didn't have dictionaries online then.
Right.
And I remember getting this paper dictionary because it was part of my school supply list, and flipping through it and reading it and being like, this is so interesting. There's all these words in here. I love it. I'm just a big old geek. So I loved books and I loved reading. And I just always thought, I would want to write a book someday, because I just loved reading books. But I never knew what I would write about. When I was little, I would write books on my parents' word processor, but those were laughable. And still always wanted to write a book. I remember sitting in my boss's office one day, and we were just talking about just our dreams and goals. And I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to write a book. But you know what? It will never be a leadership book, because the type of books, and let's just all take ourselves back and put us in the scene of circa 2007. The type of leadership books that were being passed around our office were Execution by Jack Welch, were Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, Good to Great by Jim Collins. When you Google leadership books, and actually this is true today, I tested it the other day. When you Google leadership books, often 48 of the top 50 results that are going to return to you are still going to be books written by men. So here I am sitting in my boss's office. She's a female. And we're like, oh yeah, that's a category we don't want to enter into, because we could never see ourselves in that space. This is way pre Brene Brown. This is pre Carla Harris. This is pre, a lot of these things. Yeah. And so there was no I could see myself doing that. And then so flash forward, it was 2019, I go off on my own and I was leading corporate development leadership programs. I'm familiar with a lot of them. And again, they're all designed and developed by men. And I get into these mastermind groups with other women in business because I had never been a business owner. Like I wanted my business to be successful. And I did learn how to run my business. But the thing that I learned the most was all the things that we never talked about in corporate America that needed to be in leadership development. Things like imposter syndrome, doubt, being the only woman in the room, being spoken over, sharing an idea in a meeting to have it fall on deaf ears, only to have a male colleague say the exact same thing and everybody be like, wow, that's amazing. Things like menopause, breastfeeding, managing life with work and kids and schedules. I mean, we just didn't talk about those things in the office. We didn't talk about our gut. We didn't talk about our intuitions. We didn't talk about just so many of these things. And I was almost angry. I'm like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I needed in corporate America. And had I had a container like that in corporate America, where there was other women leaders talking about issues that affect women in the workplace, I think I just would have felt normalized, validated. I would have had some tools to just recognize maybe why it was so hard to speak up when I'm sitting in a room full of men. And I was like, I need to build this. And I was like, somebody should do this. And so I went and looked for programs and there was none. And I was like, well, I grew up in training development, so I guess I'm going to build it. And so that was my first group offering. Was I created a women's leadership program. It's called the Clarity and Confidence Women's Leadership Program today. And its goal is, or its target is corporate women who are ready to learn, some of the systemic issues that they face in the workplace today, but what I believe are the core strategies to thrive in spite of those systemic issues. And so then, it really just became, I guess this is what I could write my book about. After I developed the program, I started working with a coach. Her name's Brooke Adams-Law. And we were talking about, I was so tired of talking about the book. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to get to the end of the year and yet again have not a book written. So really in working with her, it really just became obvious, this program I'm just going to put into a book. And so that's the book that became Closing the Confidence Gap. It covers a lot of what I talk about in my own leadership development program I offer women, with a few other things as well. And so I asked for help. I got a coach, and that's how the book baby was born.
I love it. I love it. So let's dig a little bit more into the book. I mean, in flipping through, there were 2 chapters that I think for my audience would be really, really interested in. And one that I thought was interesting was around leading more by doing less. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the leading more by doing less framework. And, I think this is important, no matter if you identify as male or female or somewhere in between right now, is, there is an unpaid labor right now. Unpaid labor typically ascribed to women, if we're talking about traditional gender roles. At home, it says we spend an extra 2 hours a day doing extra things that we're not paid for, shuttling kids, volunteering at the PTA, cooking meals, taking kids to doctor's appointments, right? We talk a lot about that. But there's also an unpaid workload at the office. And these are the types of things. And I want you just to really just maybe even close your eyes and just play some mental unpaid workload bingo for a moment. Little things like when meeting notes need to be taken, who takes the meeting notes? Is it a woman? Is it a man? When we need to restock the break room, who typically takes on those duties? When we need someone to plan a holiday party or an event, who typically takes on those duties? And so just little things like some of these unpaid office tasks, like running errands, are often ascribed to women, or that women are more likely asked. And when they are asked, they're more likely to say yes to those tasks over men. And so here's all of this unpaid labor that's happening at the office that's taking up all of women's time, energy, and effort. But when review time comes, the work is considered invisible, meaning, Jill, it's not going to go on your performance review that be like, oh my gosh, that break room, it was stocked to perfection. We're going to give you an extra 1% in your salary this year.
Right.
I know in my own experience, I had to lead the company fundraiser for the year. And I think anybody who's worked for organizations who are philanthropic, there's always the annual company fundraiser. And I was voluntold, you do all the work, but when it came time to review time, there was no mention, no reward, no bonus.
Right. Right.
And so I really argue that, especially given the unpaid workload, given that we live in a hustle culture society, we need to learn to lead more by doing less. And I use less as a framework, LESS. And the L stands for, let's start uncovering the limiting beliefs of why we say yes when we really want to say no. So one of them that I talk about that I've been guilty of, well, if I say no, people are going to think I'm not capable. So we really need to ask ourselves, like, is that true? That if you say no, people are going to think you're not capable? And I really encourage folks to even explore the opposite of that. Could it actually be more true that if you say yes all the time, people will think you're not capable? And I know in my case, and in a lot of, I think we can all think of folks who say yes to so many things that they don't deliver on time, or they do poor quality
work. They're totally scattered.
Yeah, and it totally affects their perceived capability. So L is lose a limiting belief of why you say yes when you want to say no. I give them tools to express their expectations and set boundaries in terms of how do we actually properly set expectations, teach people how to use us, and set boundaries around the types of work that we're going to do, especially those workloads that actually do contribute to strategy and bonus and review time and acceleration. And then the next one is S, and that's shifting our identity from doer to leader. Because in the first half of our lives, we are rewarded for all of our doing. In school, in our early jobs, we got all the gold stars, oh my gosh, Jill, you're so fast. You're so amazing. You do all this. And it feels so good.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, and I'm guilty of this even as a corporate leader, we would promote people from doer to leader and just assume that like a magic mindset transformation would happen overnight. They'd show up as their first day as a leader and be like, I'm going to stop doing all of these things and I'm going to start delegating these things and I'm going to be comfortable coaching, but it just doesn't work that way.
It's such an important point, Kelly, because I think that we do that with people, whether it's moving from an independent contributor and IC into leadership. And then also things like speaking, presentation building, showing up in meetings. You were a contributor to that. And then suddenly it's like, hey, you're up. You've been promoted. Now go do it. And yes, watching others do it can definitely help your education and knowing how to step up into those roles. But you have to find ways to practice. And that practice is what I'm hearing in this less framework is really the practicing starts now so that when you are in the position, you're ready.
Absolutely. And really coaching leaders to really notice how their ego loves individual contributor rewards, but we need to shift that. Now you need to find your rewards through coaching other people, even though it takes longer, through delegating things, through watching other people do the doing, from making big decisions, from delegating, watching, coaching, and all the patience that comes with that. And then the last S is to start delegating low stakes tasks, because all too often we get promoted and we're still doing all the doing. And then all of a sudden we're saying yes to all these things and our plate gets overloaded and we freak out like, oh my God, I'm so busy. And so like at the last minute, we have to delegate something. But the problem is when it comes from that place, lots of times we're delegating a task that is way too high stakes. And so what do people do with that? They mess up because they've never been delegated to before in that level. And so then they mess up and we're like, see, I can't delegate anything to anybody around here. And so that we take it back and we keep telling ourselves this story, like I'm the only one that can do anything around here. So we need to be very conscious and intentional about start delegating when the stakes are low, because people will make mistakes. So let's allow them to make mistakes when the stakes are low. So that way, when the stakes are high, we've got some confident repetitions under our belt in which I can count on this person to do a high stakes project because they've got proof, right?
Yeah.
So LESS.
I love it. And also falls back into some of the lessons you've learned about simplicity of just breaking it down really simple for everybody who's listening of that. Okay. That is amazing. I want to go to the other thing that I also pulled out of your book that I really, really liked is about speaking up and amplifying your voice and why this at times can be gender normative to those that identify as female. This is for everyone about knowing when to speak up and how to amplify your voice. So talk to everybody about that, what that means.
Yeah. This chapter I felt like was the bane of my existence. Like I wrote this chapter because I was the one that needed to hear it. And I think if you talk to any author, they always write the book that they need to read.
Yeah.
But I'm an introvert, and I know that surprises people because I stand up in front of audiences of hundreds of people and give presentations. But I'm really, really introverted, and it was always really hard for me to speak up, like in meetings or in the moment, or even just now being off on my own. I run my own business. So like I am my messaging, like my ideas are currency. So I need to put these ideas out into the world. But I was like, how do I say it in a way that feels good? Like, how do I speak up? Like, how do I get people to know about my message? Honestly, how do I write this book? Like, how do I come up with a framework on what to say in this book? So when I'm going to share this framework, I want you to know that this framework can be used for giving feedback. It can be used for crafting a presentation. It can be used to, share a message that you have to share. Maybe it's in a blog post or, in a company newsletter that you're going to be writing out. Maybe it's formulating what message am I going to share with my team about how I feel about this certain issue. And so I call it the advocacy model, and it's authenticity, alignment, and action, 3 overlapping circles. And I always encourage people to start with authenticity. Because you know what? The trap that I fell into is I would pick out the 1 or 2 other women leaders in my office that were maybe a little more extroverted than I was. And so I'm like, well, if I just show up like them or copy their style, then maybe I'll have what I need to speak up. But it never worked. I just sounded awkward and it was weird.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, 2 questions you can ask yourself for authenticity is this. Like, what do I know for sure about me? What are my unique skills and talents? So when I was sitting in meetings, especially I remember a time when I was sitting in a meeting, we'd just been acquired by a publicly traded company, and I was part of the mergers and acquisitions group. And they're talking about all this jargon. I have no clue what these people are talking about. They're using crazy words. And I just felt stupid. So I had to remember, okay, maybe what do I know for sure about me? Why did my leader send me here? Like, what are the unique skills and talents that only I can offer that no one else in this room can offer? And so how do I make sure that I speak up on those things? In that room, it was like, hey, I'm here as the voice of HR. I'm here as the voice of people. I'm here as the voice of training. So I need to listen for those things. So step 1, authenticity. What do you know for sure about you? What unique skills or talents do you bring to this message or this conversation? And if you're giving feedback, I always like to say, what are the facts here? Like, let's start with the facts. And then step 2 is alignment. And this is answering the question, how? How am I going to say that? And I always encourage people, well, let's say it in alignment with your values. And a great way to identify what your values are is just to ask yourself, what are 3 words that describe how you want that person to feel when they hear or see your message, when you ask a question, when you speak up in the meeting? And so, going back to my example of sitting in those merger and acquisitions meeting, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I want people to feel? Like, what's the feeling that I want to create when I speak up? Well, I want people to feel like, I'm curious, like there's a curiosity there. I want them to feel empowered, and, I want them to feel supported, like I'm supporting the effort. And so when I think about how I want people to feel, or the energy that I want to create, or the values in which I want to send a message, I can make sure that I'm writing my sentences or speaking in a way that aligns with those values. Because sometimes we have to speak up on really hard things. In my book and online, I've talked about my infertility journey and all sorts of things like that. And that's really vulnerable. And so I was very careful to be like, how do I want to say this? And what values does it align with? So when I look back a year from now, I still feel good about how I shared that message. So authenticity, alignment, and the last one is action. We can get stuck in analysis paralysis if we keep in the authenticity and alignment place. But the action question is just this: based on, my values, what is mine to say or not say? I know for my extroverted clients, they love that. What is mine to not say? I have an extroverted client who says, I keep that sticky on my computer because it was up to me. I'd speak up on everything. She goes, but honestly, it causes a lot of drama. So she's like, honestly, I love this. She's like, this is not in alignment with my unique skills and talents. This is not in alignment with my values. This is not for me to speak up on. So authenticity, alignment, and action.
I just think, again, that these 2 frameworks, the first obviously around, doing less. And then this one around authenticity, action, alignment, the advocacy model. I mean, I think these are 2 tools that are so simple and can absolutely be put into action today. So tell everyone more about the book and where they can get it.
Yes. So the book is Closing the Confidence Gap, Boost Your Peace, Your Potential, and Your Paycheck. And you can get it anywhere where books are sold. And the best place to find me or anything about the book is my website, which is kellyraythompson.com. I'm Kelli with an I, R-A-E, and then Thompson. And this book is for anyone who is just looking to build more confidence as they accelerate in their career. This book is for anyone who thinks that maybe I want to make a career change and I really want to discover what's unique about me. So, one, so I can accelerate with more confidence, but two, make a career change that feels good. And it's really interesting while this book is written for women, because it does address a lot of the systemic issues that are happening in the workplace today. I've had men pick it up and say, I need to read this because we are talking about systemic issues. They're like, I want to understand what women are going through. In fact, my husband read it and he goes, I guess I just never thought that these were things. He's like, it just never occurred to me that I should worry about this because I've always been represented. Right. And so it's been really interesting to see men's reaction to the book as well. So
I love it. And congratulations on it. I mean, it is no small feat to write a book, get published, put it out there into the world. So it's enormous. Just watching what you have created for yourself and your business over the last 2 years has been an incredible joy to see your journey. So I thank you for being here. I'm going to put everything that you mentioned in the show notes so that people can find you, follow you, get your book, and get the book, people. It is a really, really excellent book that will help you, again, regardless of where you are in your career journey. So thank you, Kelli, for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Career Refresh podcast. If you're enjoying this and you want more information, go to my website, jillgriffincoaching.com. There you can find information on how to work with me one-on-one or my group programs, or even bring me into your workplace. I'll put the link to my website in the show notes. But hey, listen, before you go, do me a favor, rate and review this podcast because it definitely helps me get the word out to people everywhere so that they can also thrive in the workplace. All right, friends, I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.